Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little music chat suggested by you. In fact, a couple of you asked me the question and said, why don't you do a talk of 10 great period instrument performances? Because you have a reputation for not liking period instruments. Well, that's not really true. It's not true at all. I don't dislike anything on principle. I dislike things that I think are non-musical. I dislike bad performances. And the period instrument movement is particularly ripe for that kind of criticism because they think that they're right about things that I happen to know they're simply wrong about. I mean, the biggest one being, of course, in string playing, the vibrato issue. But quite often, the entire aesthetic approach is incompatible with the aesthetic history of Western music. And when that happens, I feel it's incumbent upon my humble self to point that out. And I enjoy doing so, and I enjoy listening to performances. I want everything to be great. I don't like anything to be wrong. I don't root for anything to be wrong. And anyone who knows my work, actually knows my work, knows that I recommend period instrument performances as often as I don't. I don't prejudge them. I hope they're wonderful, and I call them as I hear them. And whether they're period instruments or not, I don't care. But one thing I truly dislike is a performance in which I think the players, the interpreters, are leaving the success up to the instruments. In other words, they're relying on gimmickry, not on musical interpretation. They simply say, well, I have an authentic Hammerflügel, and therefore it's the Hammerflügel, the unique sound of the Hammerflügel, the fact that it flugels this way and not that way, and it makes staccato more staccato and legato less legato, and its pedal does this, and all you hear about are these technicalities of instrument construction. You don't hear about how am I going to create a beautiful singing line, which is what the composer wanted, irrespective of the instrument that I'm using. Because, as Richard Taruskin pointed out a million years ago, the whole period instrument movement is a modern phenomenon. And the desire to have different sounds, ugly sounds, uncharacteristic, inhuman sounds, is a modern phenomenon. The period instrument movement is not a natural outcrop of our performance tradition. It grew out of the post-war avant-garde, out of the failure of belief that led people to think that mankind was not a worthy object of musical celebration, that the human voice, that singing was no longer the aesthetic goal of instrumental performance, because so much of that music, whether it's Xenakis computer music or Morton Feldman or John Cage or any of those people, is anti-human. Now, there could be wonderful music written in those styles. I love a lot of it. I'm not saying it's bad music. What I'm saying is that the aesthetic foundation of it is not the traditional emphasis on imitating the human voice. And if you imitate the human voice, if that's what your goal is, which is we know what the goal was for early composers, they talked about it endlessly, that was the goal, then you must use vibrato. You must employ legato phrasing. You must overcome the limitations of your instruments, not celebrate their defects. And the truth of the matter is that modern instruments were created to correct those defects. So a great period instrument performance, much as it may depress those on period instruments, is one that comes as close as possible to approximating the sound of those instruments now. Not necessarily in terms of the playing techniques, not necessarily in terms of the approach to tempo or rhythm or articulation, but in terms of timbre. And that's my biggest problem with the period instrument movement. And that's where so many of these players, I believe, go wrong. Now, obviously, there are other opinions about that as well. And the other thing that has always bothered me about the movement, really, is, I've written some scholarly articles on the vibrato question in performance practice. And in those articles, I've uncovered a huge amount of evidence from primary sources that has been completely ignored by the period instrument movement. Really powerful and compelling evidence. And I've shared with you some of those papers and things so that you can read them. They're out there. The point I want to make is this. I was trained as a historian. I have 2 master's degrees in history from Johns Hopkins University and Stanford University. And I'm not trying to brag about it or name drop with my credentials. But my point is that there are certain ways to use primary sources and to evaluate them critically when you're using them in a scholarly context. And I have never seen so much wretched scholarship as I have in reading the work of the supposed scholars and experts in the period instrument movement. I mean, the work that they do is dreadful. They quote sources out of context. They deliberately misconstrue the meaning of what people are saying. They use limited samples that don't mean anything and then make gross generalizations about performance practice across all of Europe and Western civilization as a result therefrom. It's bad. It's really, really bad. And that caused me to lose confidence in a lot of what they were telling me. Because I was very interested in this stuff. But I read this and I just go, whoa, wait a minute. No, that's not what they said. That's not what this means. They left out the most important sentence in the next paragraph. I mean, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of really, really poor scholarship, which leads me to question their conclusions. And musicians themselves, they're not always the brainiest people out there, and they don't question it. They figure, oh, well, the guy's got a doctorate. He's published a book. This must be the truth. But it isn't. It really isn't. Unfortunately, it isn't. You cannot trust these people. You have to do your own research. And you have to draw your own conclusions if you're really serious about what you're doing. And so, there are the performers like, Charles Mackerras, who was thoughtful and scholarly and interested and who had a completely open mind about these things and was just interested in trying out the range of possibilities without drawing any hard conclusions about being right or being wrong. There was that kind of really questing musical spirit. And then there are just the opportunists who say, well, they say I have to do it this way, so that's how I'm doing it. And as a result of that, there's a lot to criticize in performances that claim to be period instrument performances. And so I'm not trying to, excuse the fact that, I come down on these people very hard. I often do. But I am rooting for them as well, because the period instrument movement has done fabulous things. They've made us listen to tons of repertoire with completely fresh ears. And when they're hot, they're like anyone else. They're hot. But what I find is that they're usually hot because they're doing musical things. The really basic musical things, which are the same musical things somebody today would be doing who didn't give a damn about period instruments. Because those basic musical facts are universal. It doesn't matter what the superficial stylistic patina is that you're slathering over your interpretation. What matters is that you have a musical sensibility. That means you care about accent and phrasing and line and a singing cantabile tone, and you know how to put across a melody. Your concept of the piece is powerful and enduring. I mean, those are all things that exist independently of whether you're playing with period instruments or not. And great musicians will make great music, irrespective of whether they're using period instruments or not. And so, in answering your demand, I have 10 recordings, or sets of recordings, on period instruments that I think are just fabulous. Unqualifiedly fabulous. And I'm going to share them with you. And then you can make of that with what you will. But hopefully it will answer the question of where I really stand when it comes to period instruments and why I've recommended throughout these talks so many period instrument performances. I mean, because that's what people are doing, and that's where the great music making is happening. I mean, you may remember when I did the Bach choral works, I did 2 talks. I did standard instruments and period instruments, so you can take your pick. And they're marvelous in both cases. So let's get right to it, shall we? Number 1, and as usual, I've written the list down below here, so you don't have to worry about making yourself crazy trying to understand what I'm talking about or mispronouncing. Handel's water music and music for the royal fireworks with Jordi Savall, or Jordi Savall, or whatever you want to call him. And the Le Concert des Nations. Yeah, this is on Astray. Well, Astray doesn't exist. Naive, whatever that French thing is now. Boy, these are marvelous. Everybody wants to pick one of the English Handel water fire combos, and there are wonderful ones there too, on period instruments. But I really like this one. This has such joie de vivre, so much ebullience. It's just brilliant. You have to remember that essentially Handel's style in this music is French. I mean, it's French overture, it's French dances, it's Frenchy French stuff. The French thing, it's aesthetically French. And this is Spanish, so it's perfect, right? No, seriously, it's just great. It sounds amazing, and you don't get the fireworks music, with 475 oboes and all that stuff, but it doesn't matter. Their performances are just vivid and bright and visceral, and they celebrate the tangy character of those period instruments. It's just delicious, and I love it. I love it to death. So there's one. Number two. Okay, I just did a video on the reissue of the Haydn string quartets with the Festetics quartet from Hungary. Oh, they're great. They're just wonderful. And those are on period instruments. And I mentioned the fact that there is one other period instrument Haydn quartet series. It's not complete, but it's fabulous. And that's this one with the Quator Mosaic, which is sideways. There they are. The Quator Mosaic with Christophe Quin on the cello. One of the things I like about this group is that cello, because they have a sort of bass-weighted sonority, which is marvelous. First of all, it's the way these composers wrote. It's kind of like the Violin quartet, only with period instruments. They have a rich, beautiful tone, and they build their sound from the bottom up, and it's a thrilling sound. It really is. It doesn't sound like a normal quartet. It sounds like a period instrument quartet. Their approach to things like vibrato is tasteful and sensible, I think. I have to say one thing about that. I don't particularly like vibrato. I just want them to do what's right. It's not a question of liking or disliking. It's what is musically appropriate. And these guys are musically appropriate. They're wonderful performances. And you get Opus 20, 33, 64, 76, and 77, and the 7 last words in this box. And it's 10 CDs, and God, I wish they'd done the whole set, as some of you also mentioned too. I really wish they had. It would have been, one of the great Haydn quartet cycles, without a doubt. But I'm happy we have what we have, and that's number 2. Number 3, oh yes. Now, as you know, the period instrument movement has been encroaching onto the Romantic period, usually unsuccessfully. And the reason, of course, is because to apply what are basically mistaken aesthetic principles with respect to Baroque music to Romantic music makes a bad situation even worse. And so we've got Beethoven cycles and Berlioz and Verdi and all of this stuff, done with, making it sound as though it was written by, what's his name? Graupner or somebody like that. Foch. It's just a bad idea. It really is. However, there are some extremely successful Romantic performances using period instrument techniques and philosophies, and interestingly, they generally play with plenty of Romantic vibrato. At least some of them get that right. And one of the ones that does is Johann Wenzel Kalavoda, Symphonies 5 and 7 on CPO with Das Neue Orchester under Christoph Spering, who also did a fabulous Haydn creation as well. He's a very good conductor. This is just exciting. I've talked about this recording before. I've played bits of it. It's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. The music is wonderful. Kalavoda is a great undiscovered composer. His first symphony was filched by Schumann in his 4th symphony. He was admired by Schumann. He was admired by all of the composers of the day, and then he disappeared without a trace. Poof! In the second half of the 19th century, he's making a comeback. He wrote 24 concert overtures. Somebody should do them all. Are you listening, whoever you are? It'd be a great little project. But 5 and 7 is great. The recording is stunning. The performance is wonderful. The orchestra sounds really cool. I just love this record. So there you go. Kalavoda, Symphonies 5 and 7 on CPO with Christoph Spering. Number 3. Number 4. This is a 7 CD set. Anything performed by Giuliano Carmignola. This is his Sony box. He's done things now, I think, for other labels. But he started out with Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. He's just a terrific Baroque violinist. I really, really like him. I like his tone. I like his technique. I like his gusto. He can play with all of the vigor that's requisite without making his tone sound like he's swinging a cat over his head. It's really good. Really, really good. And you've got 7 discs in this Sony box, including the Four Seasons. You've got another Vivaldi concerto disc. You got 2 Vivaldi concerto discs, Locatelli, bits of L'Arte del Violino, the Bach harpsichord and violin sonatas, 1 through 6, that's 2 discs, and then a disc of miscellaneous stuff, Suite for Lute and Violin, and a guy named Kropfgans, Concerto for Lute, Violin, and Cello, and Kohout, and just all kinds of odd people with a lute guy, and he's just really good. He's really, really good. And he's accompanied by the Venice Baroque Orchestra under Andrea Marcone. And they're really good, too. Andrea Marcone's a very good period instrument conductor. It's good stuff. Sounds wonderful. Nothing not to like. Nothing at all. The repertoire, aside from the Four Seasons, but the repertoire is interesting. And this guy, Carmignola, wow. He's the real deal. He's a wonderful soloist. It doesn't matter what kind of violin he's playing. He knows how to play it. And that's good. Yeah. So let's go back to Handel for a minute. I talked about this also previously. I've thrown in a couple things that I did discuss previously because I just want to show you. They've been there all along. I haven't ignored them. This was a Dave's fave. This is Handel, Parnasso Infesta, with the King's Consort under Matthew Halls and the choir of the King's Consort. I love Parnasso Infesta, and I talked about it already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's just a delightful, delightful work. It's sort of a pastiche. It's got greatest hits from all of the other choral works that Handel did because it was written for a royal wedding, and he cobbled it together, but it's one of the best cobbler jobs you've ever heard in your life. Handel was a great cobbler. He really was, and this is phenomenal. It's on Hyperion, and if you don't know Parnasso Infesta, you are missing a really good time. So there you go. There's that one. Then, oh yes, Biber Violin Sonatas with Andrew Manze and Romanesca. This was Manze's premiere recording on Harmonia Mundi, and it blew everyone away. He was a demonic fiddler, just a terrific violinist. And the repertoire, these Biber violin sonatas, everyone plays the Rosary sonatas, but these were a total discovery. They're brilliant and fun to listen to. And he plays them to a fairly well with the other members of Romanesca. It won like every possible award in the universe. Here they all are. See all the little awards in the universe on the back of the disc. The original album, as you can see, was this dead chicken. It was originally black with the dead chicken even more prominently displayed. And I remember, Robina Young, from Harmonia Mundi, when she used to do the road show, where they would introduce, all of the upcoming releases. We showed this one, and she's like, "Sorry about the chicken." She was very funny about it, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it still is. And Manze's now doing a Vaughan Williams cycle. He's a conductor. He's kind of given up playing Baroque violin, and he didn't last long as a Baroque violinist. And I think it says something about the approach. Maybe for so many of these people, the approach is somewhat limiting. In today's Baroque scholarly, authentic performance ghetto. A lot of artists want to break out of it once they start to, realize the joy of other music. But wow, was that a great time and a fabulous sense of discovery. These performances have held up beautifully. So if you can still get this, it's Andrew Manze, Nigel North, and John Toll. Those were the Romanescas. And it's Biber, just called Biber Violin Sonatas. Look for the dead chicken. That's how you'll find it. It's just great. Also a disc that I talked about previously and simply adored, the Monteverdi Vespers with Herreweghe. With La Chapelle Royale and the Collegium Vocale and the Les Sacs-Boutiers de Toulouse. Boy, is this pretty. It's so beautiful. It really proved to me, and it was an important lesson, that period instruments don't have to sound ugly or thin or emaciated or anorexic or anemic or any of those bulimic. I mean, you pick a syndrome. They don't. This is warm. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The timbres are mellifluous. They flow beautifully, and the colors are it's like light suffused through a stained glass window. I mean, that's what it is. It's just this beautiful blending of harmonious colors. You don't ever get the sense that they're playing on creaky instruments that sound like hell. I mean, it really is beautiful in the traditional sense. And let me tell you something about traditional beauty. That's what these people wanted. They wanted the music to sing. And this performance sings. I adore it. I really do. So let's stick with that one because it's beautiful. I have what? 3 more thingies here. Yeah. Okay. Bach. Got to do some Bach, don't we? This is the complete concertos, volumes 1 through 6, with Café Zimmerman on alpha. There are so many great performances of all of the Bach concertos, from the Brandenburgs on up, just millions of them. And some of them are on modern instruments, some of them are on period instruments. I have no real preference one way or another, as long as the virtuosity is there. And again, the tone is there, and the transparency and energy are there. And they're not just, those sort of sewing machine performances where the music just relentlessly drones on, which is really a problem with Bach. Bach should be shaped and played expressively. It should not be played like, you're pulling a slot machine in Las Vegas and everything's just whirring around, going click, ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung. They so often sound like that, but these are really wonderful performances. I'm surprised they don't get mentioned more often, and they're in this really convenient little box, which was at a very good price. They're terrific. And you get the Brandenburgs, and you get the violin concertos, and you get, some of the reconstructed concertos and things like that, based on the other keyboard concertos. And my goodness, it's a wonderful set. It really is 6 discs of them. So, it's a great way to get all your Bach in a box, all the concerti. And I think you'll really just enjoy them. They're a joy to listen to. They really are. They're first class in every respect. So there you go. Café Zimmerman on alpha. Number 9. Oh, yes. The Purcell Fantasias for viols. Now, here's the thing. I happen to think, as I've said many times, that the viol sounds like a dead cow or a dying cow, or if it's a tenor or soprano viol, a dying cat, and it's a dying something mammalian, either bovine or feline. But I happen to love consort music. It's a real problem. I'm not as big a fan, of the French viol school, of the kind of thing that Jordi Savall plays. Some of that really does sound too much like, Elsie is, breathing her last. It really does. But these pieces are stunning. And the whole English viol consort bunch, John Dowland's, Lacrimae, all that stuff's beautiful, beautiful music. And, viols sound better in groups. They really do, because they can harmonize, and they have this sort of furry timbre, which works really well when you've got a few of them going, rather than just a solo one mooing along to the moon, And the Purcell Fantasias or Fantasies, whatever you want to call them, are extraordinary. There are, let's see, how many of them? 15 of them. And they were, with the time that they were written, at the very end of the 17th century, they were already completely outdated. I mean, consort music had been dying out. It was basically gone for decades by the time Purcell wrote these, and no one knows why he did exactly. But they, as everyone agrees, contain some of his most beautiful contrapuntal writing and some of his most staggeringly eloquent melodic thought, all packed into a very small space, because the longest of them, I think, is a little bit, it's like 4 minutes and a little bit, 4 minutes and 27 seconds here. This is performed by Phantasm, the group of viols, on CMAX. CMAX does stunning recordings. Their engineering is always superb. And it's one of the great recordings of Baroque repertoire. And of course, if you want to listen to consort music, you have to listen to viols. So you've got to listen to period instruments. You just don't have a choice. And so I do. And I don't mind. I really don't. As long as they don't sound like they're, well, you got it, right? So there you go. It's another terrific record. Period instruments. There it is. Finally, last but not least, my however performance. Oh yes, Nicholas Harnoncourt and Concertos Musicus Wien doing the Haydn Paris Symphonies. This is just so hot. This is the only set of Paris Symphonies that really gives Bernstein's a run for the money. And it's completely different than Bernstein's. It really is. I mean, what they have in common is just this unbelievable vitality that infuses every bar. But Harnoncourt really celebrates the timbre of the period instruments. He's not using an ensemble that seems teensy-tiny, small, and ineffectual. These are big, bold, gutsy. They're just unbelievably wonderful. I mean, when I first heard them, I was just aghast. I was agape. I was just, oh, wow. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Harnoncourt never made a better record. And he made a lot of very great records, both on period instruments and on modern instruments. He was one of the great conductors of the 20th century. And of course, the irony of this is that they didn't have conductors back when period instrument people were doing this stuff. They didn't at all. They didn't have the egomaniac at the front telling everyone how to follow the rules. People just did whatever they were inclined to do. And the result was what it was, which is yet another reason why the whole idea of, HIP performance or period instrument performances with conductors at the helm, the megalomaniac who's running things, is completely anachronistic. Totally anachronistic, but here's a good anachronism for you. Phenomenal performances that are thrilling, absolutely thrilling. So there you go. 10 really fantastic sets on period instruments. I hope this will give you some things to listen to that you maybe haven't heard before, and will show you that no, the rumors are not true. I am perfectly happy to listen to something on period instruments and call it as I hear it. It's all we can do, right? Is keep on listening. So thank you so much for joining me. Take care.